I had always thought that love, after a certain amount of time, becomes a beautiful habit, like watering the plants before coffee or aligning the knives in the drying rack. Perhaps that's why it took me so long to notice when things began to shift out of place. They were small changes, almost invisible. Ricardo's car keys were no longer in the ceramic dish by the entrance. His blazer smelled of a different kind of air, not perfume, not smoke, but the clean, recycled silence of unfamiliar environments. And text messages on his phone began to require a gentle touch on his shoulder before he would look up from the screen. "Late meeting, Helena. Don't wait up for me." He would say it just like that, with the calm of someone describing the weather. 35 years of marriage had taught me to recognize the exact timbre of his fatigue, the way he rested his fist on the table when he was worried, the discreet furrow between his eyebrows when he was lying, mostly to himself. I knew without knowing, and for a few days, I preferred to rearrange the silverware drawer. If you're watching, please like and subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where in the world you're from. It was on a Tuesday, one of those days that just slides off the calendar, that I found myself looking at his car's location through the banking app. It wasn't jealousy. It was mathematic. Late-night cash withdrawals in neighborhoods he'd never frequented, receipts from 24-hour parking garages, the same sequence of streets that felt like an inverted prayer. Then came the anemic excuses: site visit, out-of-town client, video conference that turned into dinner. I started taking notes without meaning to. Not because I doubted him. I took notes because, suddenly, forgetting felt dangerous. "You seem different, Helena," Leah, my best friend of several decades, said as we folded napkins for our group dinner. Leah had large, welcoming hands and eyes that could read the fine print of your soul. "Sleep will fix it," she added, and that word, sleep, settled on me like a thin blanket. On Friday, I went to the electronics store downtown and asked for a simple tracker, the kind anyone can install. The young man showed me a small black box, the size of a domino. It charged via USB. "Lasts a week, ma'am. It has an app. The more open the sky, the better the signal." He smiled as if he were handing me a toy. I paid in cash, felt a hot flush of shame for my own courage, and walked slowly back to my car, the device throbbing in my purse like a newborn secret. I installed it on Sunday, while Ricardo was snoring in the hammock in the backyard. I had learned over many afternoons to recognize the weight of his sleep. This was a heavy one, the kind that disarms all guard. The manual said to affix it to a metal point, away from heat. I stretched out on the garage floor, the cool cement on my cheek, and with a magnetic click, it was there, hidden like an ant behind a picture frame. That evening, he said he needed to stop by the office. I gave him a kiss that felt like signing a receipt. I waited 5 minutes, then opened the app. The map drew his route like a vein: Main Avenue, overpass, tunnel. The blue icon parked at his company's building. I breathed. 17 minutes. The icon started moving again, made a strange turn, and took a shortcut we never use. It stopped at a well-known restaurant, the kind with bow-tied waiters and heavy linen napkins. "Client dinner." A text message arrived, almost as if confirming my own map. It was only on Wednesday, at 12 minutes past midnight, that the point decided to speak to me. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, my hands warming a mug of chamomile tea, when my phone vibrated. The app allowed for motion alerts during set hours. I had marked from 11 p.m. to 3 a.m. The car started. The blue icon crawled down the street like a luminous caterpillar, took the nearly empty expressway, and 28 minutes later, parked in a place the map cruelly named unregistered address. I zoomed in. An entire block with no marking, a pale rectangle surrounded by streets named after trees. On either side, houses with proper numbering. In the center, cartographic silence. I switched to satellite view, and there it was, a stone driveway, 2 rows of cypress trees guarding a path, an iron gate that was invisible from the street. In the background, rectangular shadows that could be low-roofed, perhaps a courtyard. I drank the now cold chamomile. If you're watching, please like and subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where in the world you're from. The next day, I asked without asking, "Were you at the office so late last night?" He chewed his toast as if selecting his words. I stopped to look over a report. "The Jundiai project is delayed." Outside, a robin insisted on a song that sounded like laughter. "Right," I said, and discovered that right could be the most vacant word in the language. 3 nights later, the same route, same time, same pause in the left lane, same turn that seemed known by other feet. I marked it in my notebook. Wednesday, 12:11 a.m. Monday, 12:17 a.m. Thursday, 12:04 a.m. I wasn't taking notes to organize. I was taking notes to keep from going insane. The pale rectangle on the map began to look like a windowless room. I went there on Friday. The street was called Jacaranda Lane, the kind that ends in a cul-de-sac designed to give privacy to those who live beyond the world. I parked 2 blocks away and walked, faking a phone call. The gate was simple, but the call box was nameless. Through a gap in the wall, I could see a narrow corridor, the shadow of the cypress trees, and a low light further in, like a car's dipped headlights. There was no plaque, no intercom with a list of names. The mailman would pass right by. It was a place for people who prefer to be coordinates rather than an address. I drove home with a feeling that wasn't jealousy, nor relief. It was something else, a curiosity that boils and burns, but cooks nothing. Ricardo came in late, without the smell of the restaurant, without the exhaustion of a construction site. He had the silence of someone who has just watched a difficult film. I asked him if dinner was good. He smiled, a smile I didn't entirely recognize. It was what it needed to be. Leah called me on Saturday to ask if I was going to choir practice. I said yes, that I needed to sing something other than my own thoughts. She talked about recipes, about an orange cake she swore was the fluffiest in the world. I almost told her. I almost said, "I know you so well that sometimes I mistake you for myself," but the sentence stayed on my tongue like a pill you forget to swallow. On Monday, I bought binoculars. I never thought I would do such a thing. The young woman at the hunting and fishing store suggested a robust model. I thought of the cypress trees. I thought of the unregistered address as a headache the map couldn't diagnose. I placed the binoculars on the passenger seat, next to a bottle of water and a packet of crackers. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror, and there was an expression on my face that frightened me. It wasn't sadness, nor anger. It was determination, the kind I usually reserved for the garden plants when the sun was too harsh. That night, at 11:57 p.m., his car started. I had left 5 minutes earlier. I parked 3 houses down from the gate, turned off my lights, and waited. The blue icon on my phone confirmed, arrived. From where I was, I could see the shadow of a man getting out of the car and the discreet glow of a light turning on inside, as if the house had sighed. I pressed the binoculars to my eyes and breathed slowly through my mouth. I didn't see anyone embrace. I heard no laughter, nor the kind of silence that lovers produce when the world must not know of them. I just saw a shadow move from left to right and then disappear. The car's clock read 12:32 a.m. I asked myself what I had been expecting to see, and for the first time I wished not to see. When I got home, Ricardo was already asleep. One hand outside the covers, fingers curled as if still holding an invisible steering wheel. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, and the sentence I hadn't wanted to say to Leah was no longer a sentence. It had become a question I didn't know who to ask. At what point does love learn to walk down paths where the other person doesn't fit? My phone vibrated at 3:02 a.m. I wasn't asleep. The app registered movement. The blue icon moved out of the pale rectangle. I got up, walked silently through the house, opened the living room window, and pressed my forehead against the cold glass. The car was pulling onto the street, and I could have sworn I heard, from very far away, a pair of cypress trees applauding someone's departure. I didn't know, at that moment, that this would be the last night I would call it betrayal. I only knew that from that point on the map, I was no longer the same. The following week, the points on the map began to form a constellation of deceit. Monday, 12:17 a.m. Wednesday, 12:11 a.m. Thursday, 12:04 a.m. The unregistered address was no longer an anomaly. It was a ritual. My nights became a series of quiet, tense vigils, sitting in the dark of my own living room, watching a blue dot on a screen. The habit of sleep deserted me. In its place was a low, humming anxiety, the feeling of waiting for a verdict on a crime I hadn't yet seen committed. Ricardo, meanwhile, was a master of plausible deniability. He was attentive in his own distracted way, remembering to bring me the specific brand of Earl Grey tea I liked, complimenting the new irises in the garden, but his eyes were elsewhere. He moved through our shared life like a man walking through a familiar room in the dark, his hands outstretched to avoid bumping into furniture he knew was there but could no longer see clearly. We were living in the same house, but in different time zones. The need to know, to put a name to the shadow that was consuming my marriage, became a physical ache. It was no longer about infidelity. Infidelity was a simple, brutal narrative I could understand. This felt different, more complex, more secretive. The lie was so careful, so structured, that it felt less like a passionate affair and more like a second clandestine life. One afternoon, my curiosity finally won out over my fear. I did something I had never done in 35 years of marriage. I went into Ricardo's office, the room he considered his sanctuary, and I began to search. I felt like a trespasser in my own home, my heart pounding with a mixture of guilt and righteous indignation. I wasn't looking for letters or lingerie. I was looking for a map, a clue, a name for the unnamed street. His desk was, as always, impeccably organized. Bills in one folder, project blueprints in another. But in the bottom drawer, tucked beneath a stack of old tax returns, I found a small, leather-bound day planner from the current year. It was the kind he used for work, but this one was different. The entries were sparse, written in his neat architectural script. Monday, 12 a.m., JL House. Wednesday, 12 a.m., JL House. Thursday, 12 a.m., JL House. JL. The initials hung in the air, a pair of empty hooks waiting for a name. I searched my mind, running through the list of his clients, his colleagues. No one fit. The initials meant nothing to me. But then, my eyes fell on another entry from a few weeks prior. Saturday, 2 p.m., choir practice lunch, Leah. And next to it, a small circled note. Confirm time with H. H for Helena. My breath caught in my throat. Leah, my best friend, my confidant, the godmother to our children. Leah. L. The same letter. It couldn't be. The thought was so monstrous, so utterly unthinkable, that my mind physically recoiled. Leah's husband had died a few years ago. She was my friend, my sister. She held my hand at my own husband's funeral. She brought me soup when I had the flu. The idea of her and Ricardo, it was a betrayal on a scale I couldn't comprehend. It wasn't just a shattered marriage, it was a shattered world. My hands trembling, I did a quick property search on my tablet. It was a desperate, grasping at straws action. I typed in the address of the unregistered property, the one on Jacaranda Lane. The public records were, as the map had suggested, sparse. The property was owned by a holding company, a numbered LLC designed for anonymity, but there was a public filing, a permit for a minor roof repair from 2 years ago. And on that permit, listed as the emergency contact for the property, was a name, Leah Jacobson. JL. The room seemed to tilt. I sat down heavily in Ricardo's large leather chair, the day planner open on my lap. The pieces were all there, a constellation of betrayal that was horrifyingly, sickeningly clear. The late nights, the secret address, the initials, Leah. My first impulse was to scream, to smash something, to confront them both with the ugly, undeniable truth. But a strange, cold calm washed over me. The librarian in me, the part that valued order and evidence, took over. This was not a crime of passion to be met with a passionate response. This was a long, calculated deception. It required an equally calculated response. I would not confront them. Not yet. I would watch. I would gather my evidence. I would understand the full scope of their treachery. I had spent my life being the quiet, unassuming, supportive wife. That woman was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize, a woman who bought binoculars and installed tracking devices and looked at her best friend's name on a legal document and felt not grief but a cold, clarifying rage. That night, when Ricardo came home, I had prepared his favorite meal, a slow braised lamb shank. He was surprised and pleased. "What's the occasion?" he asked, kissing my cheek. "No occasion," I said, my voice even, my smile a perfect brittle mask. I just felt like it. As we ate, I watched him. I watched the way his eyes still crinkled when he smiled. I watched the familiar gesture of him running his hand through his hair when he was tired. I was watching a stranger, a man I had slept next to for 35 years, a man whose every habit I thought I knew. He was a ghost living in my house, and I was a ghost living in his life. We were two spies at a dinner table, each pretending the other was real. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this quiet, domestic war was only just beginning. The discovery that the other woman was Leah changed the texture of my investigation. The initial, vague pain of a potential affair had been a dull ache, a bruise on my marriage. This was a razor blade to the heart. It was a betrayal that was not just about sex or romance. It was about the desecration of a sacred 30-year friendship. Every shared coffee, every tearful confession, every "I don't know what I'd do without you" was now retroactively poisoned. A scene from a play where I was the only one who didn't know her lines. My grief, however, quickly curdled into a cold, hard resolve. I would not be a victim in this story. I would be a scientist. I would observe, document, and understand the full nature of the experiment being conducted at my expense. The next Monday, I watched the blue dot of Ricardo's car make its familiar, late-night journey to Jacaranda Lane. But this time, I wasn't just watching the map. I was there, parked in the same dark spot 3 houses down, the binoculars feeling like a natural extension of my own eyes. I watched him pull into the driveway, the gate closing silently behind him. A light went on in a downstairs window. The house from the outside was a picture of quiet, suburban peace. It was a house that kept its secrets well. I waited. 1 hour, 2. My car grew cold. The crackers I had brought tasted like sawdust. I was about to give up to drive home to my cold, empty bed when I saw something that made me sit up straight. It was around 3 a.m. The gate of Leah's house slid open again, but it wasn't Ricardo's car that emerged. It was Leah's car, a modest, dark blue sedan, and Ricardo was behind the wheel. My mind raced, trying to process this new, bizarre piece of information. Why would he drive her car? Where were they going at this hour? My initial, simple theory of a clandestine tryst was suddenly complicated. People having an affair don't typically swap cars in the middle of the night. I started my engine, my hands shaking slightly, and began to follow them. I kept my distance, my headlights off, feeling like a character in a cheap detective novel. But there was nothing cheap about the cold knot of dread in my stomach. They didn't drive to a hotel. They didn't drive to a scenic lookout point. They drove in the opposite direction of our side of town, heading south towards the industrial outskirts of the city, an area of warehouses, factories, and the kind of forgotten marginal neighborhoods that don't appear on tourist maps. The drive took nearly 40 minutes. Finally, they pulled into the parking lot of a large, anonymous-looking building. It was a modern, clinical-looking structure surrounded by a high fence. There was a single, discreet sign near the entrance. I squinted through my binoculars to read it. Renaissance Rehabilitation Center. A rehabilitation center? My confusion deepened. I watched as Ricardo got out of the car, walked around to the passenger side, and opened the door for Leah. She emerged, but she was not alone. There was someone else in the car, a figure in the back seat I hadn't seen before. A young man, hunched and frail, his face obscured by a hoodie. Ricardo and Leah each took one of his arms, and together, the 3 of them walked slowly, carefully, toward the entrance of the building. They looked like 2 parents supporting a sick child. I sat in my car, my mind a blank screen. This made no sense. Who was the boy? What were they doing at a rehab clinic at 3 in the morning? Leah's son, Tiago, my godson, was supposed to be in Europe, studying abroad for the past 2 years. He sent postcards, cheerful, generic updates about his travels. He was a brilliant, promising young man, the pride of Leah's life. I waited until they had disappeared inside the building. Then I drove home, my head spinning. The simple, painful narrative of betrayal had been replaced by a complex, unsettling mystery. My husband was not just having an affair with my best friend. They were engaged in a secret nocturnal ritual that involved a third person and a rehabilitation clinic. The next morning, when Ricardo came down for breakfast, he looked exhausted, his face pale and drawn. He had the weary, hollowed-out look of someone who had been up all night, not in the throes of passion, but in the trenches of a long, grueling battle. "You look tired," I said, my voice carefully neutral as I poured him a cup of coffee. "Long night," he mumbled, not looking at me. "Problems at the Jundiaí site." The lie was so bald, so automatic, that I almost laughed. The Jundiaí project had been completed 6 months ago. He was not even trying anymore. He was simply reciting a script he assumed I was still willing to read along with. I sat down across from him at the kitchen table, the same table where we had planned our children's birthday parties, where we had argued about mortgages and celebrated anniversaries. I looked at this man, this stranger, and I felt a profound, seismic shift within me. My anger, my grief, my sense of betrayal, they were still there, but they were now joined by a new, more powerful emotion, a desperate, burning need to understand. This was no longer just about me. It was about Leah. It was about Ricardo. And it was about the mysterious, hooded figure they were hiding in the dead of night. The points on the map were no longer leading me to a simple, sordid affair. They were leading me somewhere far darker, far more complicated. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bone, that I would follow them to the end. Claro. Aqui estão os capítulos seguintes, de Pontos no Mapa, continuando de onde paramos, em inglês e na primeira pessoa, conforme sua solicitação, mantendo o comprimento e a profundidade da narrativa. The mystery of the Renaissance Rehabilitation Center consumed me. I spent the next few days in a fog of speculation, the image of that hunched, hooded figure being led into the building, replaying in my mind. The simple, painful narrative of an affair had been a poison I could understand. This new mystery was a labyrinth. I used my skills as a retired librarian, my ability to navigate the quiet, dusty corridors of information, and I began to dig. I started with the center itself. A few discreet phone calls, posing as a potential donor, got me some basic information. It was a private, high-end facility specializing in substance abuse, particularly opioid addiction among young adults. It was known for its privacy and its success rate, and its cost was astronomical. Opioid addiction. The words felt alien, something from a television drama, not something connected to my quiet suburban life. I searched my mind for a connection. Ricardo and I rarely even took aspirin. Leah was a social drinker at best, and Tiago, my godson, Tiago, was a golden boy, a brilliant student, a talented musician, a kind, gentle soul who was, according to the cheerful postcards that arrived every few months, backpacking through Southeast Asia, finding himself before starting graduate school. The idea of him being connected to a place like this was not just unlikely, it was utterly inconceivable. And yet, the hooded figure had been a young man. The height, the slight build, it could have been him. But my mind refused to make the connection. It was a cognitive dissonance I couldn't resolve. The breaking point came on a Sunday. We had our usual family lunch. Ricardo and I, our 2 grown children with their spouses, and the grandchildren. Leah always came to these, a fixture, an honorary aunt. The tension was a living entity at the table. Ricardo and Leah barely looked at each other. I moved plates and passed the salad with a brittle, cheerful efficiency that fooled no one. The air was thick with the things we weren't saying. After the guests had left and the house was quiet, I couldn't bear it any longer. The not knowing was a cancer, eating me from the inside out. I found Ricardo in his office, staring out the window at the setting sun. I didn't storm in with accusations. My anger had been replaced by a deep, cold dread. I stood in the doorway and simply asked the question, "What are you and Leah doing at the Renaissance Rehabilitation Center 3 times a week, Ricardo?" He didn't turn around. His shoulders, which had always seemed so broad and strong, slumped. He rested his forehead against the cool glass of the window. For a long time, he said nothing. I could see the reflection of his face in the darkening glass, a mask of pure, unadulterated anguish. "Helena," he began, his voice a low, ragged whisper, "there are some things, some burdens, that you don't ask the person you love to carry. Try me," I said, my own voice surprisingly steady. And so, he told me. The story came out not in a rush, but in broken, painful fragments, like pieces of a shattered mirror. The golden boy, Tiago, had not been backpacking through Asia. 2 years ago, after a minor sports injury, he had been prescribed painkillers. He had gotten addicted. The addiction had spiraled, quickly and catastrophically. He had lost his scholarship, dropped out of school, and fallen into a world of debt and desperation. The postcards from Asia were being sent by a friend, a lie concocted to protect Leah from the shame and the judgment of our social circle. The real story was far uglier. 2 years ago, Tiago had overdosed, a near-fatal overdose of fentanyl-laced heroin. Leah had found him, blue and not breathing, on the floor of his apartment. He had survived, barely. The doctors had told Leah that he needed immediate, intensive, long-term care if he was to have any chance at all. Leah had been destroyed. Her husband was gone. She was alone, facing the nightmare of her son's addiction, the astronomical cost of his treatment, and the crushing weight of the social stigma. And so, she had turned to the one person she knew she could trust implicitly, her oldest, dearest friend, Ricardo, my husband. The secret they had been keeping was not an affair. It was a rescue mission. The late-night visits to Leah's house were not romantic trysts. They were strategy sessions, whispered conversations about treatment options, about how to pay the bills without raising suspicion. The trips to the rehab center were for family therapy sessions, for meetings with doctors, for the simple, grueling work of sitting with a young man as he went through the hell of withdrawal. The reason Ricardo drove Leah's car was a heartbreakingly practical one. Leah was often too distraught, too exhausted, too emotionally shattered to drive herself. He was her chauffeur, her confidant, her co-conspirator in a war she could not fight alone. "I wanted to tell you, Helena," Ricardo said, finally turning to face me, his eyes filled with tears. "God, I wanted to tell you, every single day. But how could I? How could I put this burden on you? It was Leah's secret to tell, her shame. And I promised her I would protect her. I would protect Tiago. I never thought that in protecting them, I would be betraying you." The truth, in all its devastating, heartbreaking complexity, settled in the room. The affair I had imagined, the simple, selfish betrayal, would have been easier to bear. This was a story with no villains, only victims. And the greatest betrayal, I was beginning to realize, was not that my husband had been lying to me. It was that he and my best friend had believed I was not strong enough to bear the truth. The morning sun filtered through the curtains as I sat alone in the living room, the weight of Ricardo's confession settling like a thick fog around me. The truth about Tiago was a revelation, a seismic event that had shifted the very foundations of my world. It redefined nearly everything I had believed about my husband, my best friend, and myself. For months, I had unknowingly played the role of the outsider, the deceived wife, the betrayed partner. I had imagined scenes of sordid passion, of whispered sweet nothings in the dark. But the reality was a different kind of intimacy, a different kind of betrayal. It was the intimacy of a shared, terrible secret, of a bond forged in the crucible of a crisis I had not even known existed. Ricardo and Leah had been partners, yes, but their partnership was not one of romance. It was a partnership of desperation, of shared grief, of a grim, relentless battle fought in the shadows. I found myself reconsidering everything. The late-night vigils at the unregistered address, which I had imagined as romantic trysts, were actually crisis meetings. The hushed, secretive conversations on the phone were not lovers' whispers, but frantic discussions about treatment plans and financial arrangements. The unexplained absences, the exhaustion, the lies about client dinners and site visits, they were all sacrifices made in the shadows, invisible yet profound. Ricardo had not been giving his time and energy to another woman. He had been giving it to a desperate, drowning friend, and to the son I loved as my own. The pain of the deception was still there, a sharp physical ache in my chest. I had been lied to, excluded, treated like a fragile child who couldn't handle the truth. My trust in my husband, in my best friend, had been fractured. But my anger, the cold, righteous fury that had been my fuel for weeks, began to dissipate, replaced by a complex, muddy wave of other emotions. There was relief, a profound relief that the simple, sordid affair I had imagined was not real. There was a deep, aching sorrow for Leah and for Tiago, for the private hell they had been living. And there was a new, unfamiliar feeling toward Ricardo, a mixture of resentment for his secrecy and a grudging, painful admiration for his loyalty, for his capacity to bear such a heavy burden for so long. Despite the ache in my heart, I knew the path ahead was fraught with challenges. How would I reconcile this secret with my own feelings of neglect? For 35 years, I had been the center of Ricardo's emotional world. To discover that he had a whole other life, a whole other emotional sphere of such intensity that I was not a part of, was a profound shock to my own sense of self. How could I come to terms with the fractured trust that now lay between us? He had chosen to protect Leah's secret over our shared honesty. Was that an act of loyalty or an act of betrayal? I didn't know. The days that followed were filled with difficult conversations, tears, and moments of raw vulnerability. Ricardo and I talked more than we had in years. He spoke of the guilt, the exhaustion, the constant fear of being discovered. He confessed that the lies had become a habit, a second skin, and that he no longer knew how to take it off. I, in turn, confessed my own journey. The tracker, the binoculars, the long, lonely nights of suspicion. I told him of the pain of feeling like a stranger in my own marriage. The truth, it turned out, was not a single, clarifying event. It was an unraveling, a slow, painful process of pulling at the threads of a tapestry that had been woven over years. A few days later, Leah reached out. Her call was unexpected, but not unwelcome. After days of my avoiding her, of her own heavy glances and cold shoulders at our book club meeting, her voice on the phone trembled with a mix of apprehension and relief. "Helena," she said, her voice cracking, "Ricardo told me you know. Can we meet? I think it's time to talk." Meeting her felt like stepping into a fragile truce. We sat across from each other at our favorite cafe, the same one where we had celebrated birthdays and mourned losses. The sunlight filtering through the lace curtains cast shadows that echoed the fragility of our newfound broken connection. She spoke softly about Tiago, about the brilliant, funny boy she had watched disappear into the fog of addiction. She spoke of the fear, the guilt, and the unbearable shame that had silenced her, that had made her hide her son's illness from the world, even from me, her best friend. She confessed how Ricardo had become her comrade in the shadows, the only person in the world who knew the full extent of her nightmare, the one who shared the burden that neither of them could bear alone. "I didn't want to drag you into it, Helena," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I wanted to protect you from the ugliness. I was so ashamed. I shared my own pain, the sense of betrayal, the loneliness that had crept into the corners of my life, and the quiet anger that had been my constant companion for months. In that small room, surrounded by the smell of coffee and the murmur of other people's happy, uncomplicated lives, we began to dismantle our shared silence, brick by painful brick. We made no promises of an easy friendship, only a commitment to honesty and a tentative hope that, perhaps in time, we could rebuild what had been so thoroughly broken. I realized that forgiveness wouldn't come easy. It wouldn't be a single act, but a journey, a slow rebuilding of bonds strained by circumstances none of us could have controlled. Yet in the midst of the pain, a new form of love began to emerge, one built not on the illusion of perfection, but on the messy, difficult and undeniable truth of our shared lives. Leah's confession was not an absolution, but it was an opening. For weeks, my world had been a silent, black and white film of suspicion and betrayal. Now, color and sound were rushing back in, chaotic and painful, but real. Our friendship, which had been a cornerstone of my life for more than 30 years, was in ruins. But as we sat in that cafe, surrounded by the ghosts of our shared past, I saw a flicker of the woman I had always loved, the woman who had held my hand at my mother's funeral, the woman who knew my coffee order by heart. She was still there, buried under layers of shame and fear. I knew I had a choice. I could hold on to my anger, my righteous indignation at being excluded, or I could try to understand. I chose to try. "Why didn't you tell me, Leah?" I asked, my voice softer than I expected. "I'm your friend. I'm Tiago's godmother. Did you really think I would judge you?" "It wasn't about judgment, Helena," she said, twisting a napkin in her hands. "It was about contamination, the addiction. It felt like a plague, a shameful, dirty secret. I felt like if I spoke it aloud, it would infect everything it touched. It would infect our friendship. It would infect your perception of Tiago. I wanted to keep him perfect in your eyes, the golden boy you always knew. I was a fool. I thought I was protecting you, but I was just isolating myself." Her words resonated with a painful truth. In her desire to protect me from her pain, she had built a wall between us, and Ricardo, in his desire to protect her, had done the same. They had both treated me like something fragile, something to be kept safe from the harsh realities of the world, and in doing so, they had made me a stranger in my own life. "I'm stronger than you think, Leah," I said quietly. "I know that now," she whispered. The weeks that followed our meeting were a tumultuous roller coaster of emotions. There was no magic fix, no sudden return to the easy, comfortable life we once knew. Instead, it was a slow, painful march through grief, resentment, and a reluctant, burgeoning understanding. Ricardo, caught between his loyalty to me and his sense of responsibility towards Leah and Tiago, was a shadow of himself. He tried to be present for everyone, but he was stretched thin, exhausted, and broken. I saw the toll the years of secrecy had taken on him, the deep lines that had been etched into his face, the quiet, weary sighs that escaped him in the dead of night. He had been carrying the weight of 2 families, and it had nearly crushed him. Our family gatherings became delicate, carefully choreographed dances. The easy banter was gone, replaced by a strained politeness. My own children, who had noticed the tension but had no idea of its source, walked on eggshells around us. Unspoken words hung heavy in the air, and every silenced question felt like an accusation. We were navigating our fractured relationships with a fragile grace that only time and a desperate need for peace could demand. One chilly evening, about a week after our coffee, Leah called me. Her voice was hesitant. "I'm going to the hospital to see Tiago," she said. "The doctors say he had a good day. I was wondering if you would want to come with me." The invitation was both terrifying and necessary. A part of me wanted to say no, to stay in my safe, quiet world. But a larger part knew that this was the only way forward. I could not truly forgive, could not truly understand, until I saw the reality of the battle they were fighting. The sterile, antiseptic scent of the hospital was overpowering. The steady, relentless beep of a heart monitor from a nearby room was a constant reminder of fragility. Leah led me down a long, quiet corridor to a room at the very end. The sign on the door read, "Quiet Zone." Tiago was asleep. He was thinner than I remembered, his face pale and gaunt, his vibrant energy replaced by a deep, profound weariness. An IV was taped to his hand. He looked like a fallen soldier. My heart broke. This was the brilliant, laughing boy I had known. This was the reality of the secret they had been keeping. We sat in silence for a long time, 2 women watching a young man sleep. Words felt inadequate, trivial. After a while, Tiago stirred. His eyes fluttered open. He saw his mother, and a weak smile touched his lips. Then he saw me. His eyes widened, and I saw a flicker of the old shame, the old fear. I moved to his bedside and took his free hand. It was cold and thin. He looked away, unable to meet my eyes. "It's okay, Tiago," I whispered. "It's okay. I'm here." He finally looked at me, his eyes filling with tears. He squeezed my hand, a fragile, desperate contact. And in that simple human touch, the complexities of our tangled lives, the betrayal, the lies, the anger, seemed to soften, to recede. They were still there, but they were no longer the whole story. We didn't speak much that evening. I simply sat with him, holding his hand, while Leah read to him from a worn copy of The Lord of the Rings, his favorite book as a child. We were a strange, fragile, makeshift family, forged in the quiet moments between hope and despair. The path before us was uncertain, scarred by wounds both fresh and old, but it was a path we would now walk together. For Tiago, if not yet for ourselves. The hospital room became a new, strange kind of geography in my life. I started going with Leah a few times a week. At first, my presence was a source of tension. Tiago was ashamed, his guilt a palpable thing in the small, sterile room. He would barely speak, his eyes fixed on the television, his answers to my questions monosyllabic. Ricardo, who would often meet us there after work, was caught in the middle, a weary diplomat trying to broker a peace treaty between three warring nations. Our conversations were stilted, careful. We spoke of the weather, of sports, of the news. We spoke of everything except the one thing that filled the room, the wreckage of our relationships, the betrayal, the lies, the years of secrets. They were a fourth person in the room, silent and judgmental. But slowly, painstakingly, things began to change. The change was not driven by grand apologies or dramatic confrontations. It was driven by the quiet, relentless reality of Tiago's struggle. Watching him fight, day in and day out, against the physical and psychological demons of his addiction had a way of putting our own hurts into perspective. My sense of personal betrayal, as sharp and painful as it was, seemed small in comparison to the life-or-death battle being waged in that hospital bed. I began to see the toll the secret had taken, not just on me, but on everyone. I saw it in the dark circles under Leah's eyes, in the way her hands trembled when she poured a cup of coffee. She had been living a double life for 2 years, projecting an image of cheerful, widowed resilience to the world, while privately navigating the hell of her son's addiction. I saw it in Ricardo, in the deep lines that had been etched into his face, in the quiet sighs that escaped him when he thought no one was listening. He had been carrying the weight of 2 families, and it had nearly crushed him. And I saw it in Tiago. I saw the shame he carried, the self-loathing for the pain he had caused. One evening, when Leah had stepped out to talk to a doctor, he turned to me, his eyes filled with a raw, desperate honesty. "I'm sorry, Aunt Helena," he whispered, his voice hoarse, "for everything, for the lies, for what this has done to you and Uncle Ricardo." "It's not your fault, Tiago," I said, my own voice thick with emotion. "Yes, it is," he said, a single tear tracing a path down his gaunt cheek. "I did this. I made the choices. They were just trying to clean up my mess." In that moment of raw confession, a wall I hadn't even realized was still there, crumbled within me. My anger, my resentment, it was all directed at the wrong people. The true villain was not Leah nor Ricardo. It was the addiction itself, a monstrous, insidious disease that had taken my bright, beautiful godson and twisted him into a stranger. That night, for the first time, the 4 of us, Leah, Ricardo, Tiago, and I, talked. Really talked. We talked about the fear, the shame, the lies. Leah and Ricardo apologized to me, not for their actions, but for their secrecy, for their assumption that I was too fragile to handle the truth. And I apologized to them for my suspicion, for the anger that had blinded me to their own pain. It was not a neat, tidy resolution. The wounds were too deep for that, but it was a beginning, a clearing of the air, a first tentative step onto a new, shared path. As Ricardo and I drove home late that night, a comfortable silence settled between us. He reached across the center console and took my hand. His hand was warm, familiar. It felt like coming home after a long, difficult journey. "Thank you, Helena," he said softly. "For what?" I asked. "For being you," he said. "For being stronger than I ever gave you credit for." The points on the map had led me to a place of pain and betrayal, but they had also, unexpectedly, led me back to my husband and to a new, deeper understanding of the complex, messy, and resilient nature of love. The bond between us, which had been stretched to its breaking point, was not broken. It was, I realized, being reforged in the fire of this shared crisis, becoming something different, something stronger, something more honest. The weeks that followed our collective confession were a period of fragile, tentative reconstruction. It was like living in a house after an earthquake. The foundation had held, but the walls were cracked, and we were all carefully stepping around the debris, unsure of what was stable and what might still come crashing down. Tiago's recovery was a slow, arduous process, a series of small victories and painful setbacks. There were good days when the old, funny, brilliant Tiago would surface, his laughter filling the sterile hospital room. And there were bad days when the withdrawal and the depression would pull him back into a dark, silent place. We learned to celebrate the good days and to simply endure the bad ones, a united front against the disease that was trying to claim him. Our new family unit was a strange, misshapen thing. We spent our evenings in the hospital, eating takeout food from plastic containers, playing board games, and watching old movies on a laptop. Leah, Ricardo, and I. The betrayed wife, the unfaithful husband, and the other woman. But the old labels no longer fit. We were something else now. 3 old friends, bound together by a shared love for a young man who was fighting for his life. The biggest challenge was learning to trust again. The years of lies had created a chasm between us. I found myself questioning everything, second-guessing Ricardo's motives, analyzing Leah's words for hidden meaning. The tracker was long gone from Ricardo's car, but the suspicion it had planted in my heart was a hard weed to pull. The turning point for me came one Saturday afternoon. Leah had asked me to help her with a difficult task, cleaning out Tiago's apartment. He was being moved to a long-term residential facility, and his old apartment, the scene of his overdose, had to be vacated. It had been sealed for almost 2 years, a time capsule of his descent. The air in the apartment was stale, thick with the smell of dust and regret. The place was a mess, a physical manifestation of the chaos that had consumed his life. Piles of clothes on the floor, dirty dishes in the sink, stacks of overdue bills on the table. As we sorted through his things, I began to see the story of his addiction not as a moral failing, but as a human tragedy. I found his old guitar, its strings broken. I found his college textbooks, their pages filled with his brilliant, insightful notes. And I found the things that told the other story, the empty pill bottles hidden in the back of a drawer, the pawn shop receipts for his laptop and his camera, the desperate, pleading letters from collection agencies. In his bedroom, on his nightstand, was a framed photograph. It was a picture of the 4 of us, Ricardo, Leah, Tiago, and me, taken years ago on a happy, sunny day at the beach. We were all laughing, our arms around each other. We were a family. Leah saw me looking at it. She came and stood beside me, her eyes filling with tears. "He kept that by his bed," she whispered. "Even at his worst, he never forgot us." We spent the rest of the day in a quiet, shared sorrow, packing his life into boxes. We were not just cleaning an apartment. We were bearing witness to his pain, to the life that had been lost to the fog of addiction. As we were about to leave, I noticed a small, locked wooden box on his desk. "What's this?" I asked. Leah shook her head. "I don't know. I've never seen it before." We found the key in a small dish on his dresser. Inside the box, there was no drug paraphernalia, no dark secret. There were only postcards, dozens of them. Postcards from all over the world. Thailand, Vietnam, Peru, Spain. They were the postcards he was supposed to have been sending from his trip abroad. His friend had been mailing them for him, creating the fiction of his travels. But he had written every single one of them himself in that small, dark apartment while his life was falling apart. Each one was addressed to Leah, but the messages were for all of us. They were filled with beautiful, imagined descriptions of places he would never see, and underneath a current of deep, heartbreaking longing for home. The last one was dated the day before his overdose. "Mom," it read, "I think it's time to come home now. I'm tired of traveling. I miss you. Tell Uncle Ricardo and Aunt Helena I love them. See you soon, Tiago." I held the postcard in my hand, the cheap cardboard suddenly feeling as heavy as a stone tablet. This was the true cost of the secret. Not just the lies and the betrayal, but the profound isolation of a young man who felt he had to travel to the other side of the world just to find his way back home. And I, in my own bubble of suspicion, had been completely blind to his pain. My heart ached, not with the old, selfish pain of betrayal, but with a new, shared, and somehow cleaner grief. The move to the residential facility was a new chapter for all of us. The Renaissance Rehabilitation Center, which had once been a mysterious point on my map, was now a real place, a place of quiet routine and difficult work. It was a beautiful, isolated campus in the mountains, a place designed to remove its residents from the temptations and triggers of their old lives. Tiago thrived there. Away from the shame and the secrets of his old life, he began to heal. He participated in therapy, both individual and group. He started playing music again, his guitar skills slowly returning to his stiff, unused fingers. He worked in the center's large organic garden, finding a quiet, meditative peace in the simple act of nurturing new life. Our visits were different now. We were no longer a clandestine trio, sneaking into a hospital in the dead of night. We were a family, showing up on visiting day, bringing cookies and books and news from home. We participated in the family therapy sessions, awkward, painful meetings where we learned a new language of honesty and accountability. I learned to speak of my own feelings, not as accusations, but as simple truth. When you lied to me, Ricardo, I felt invisible. I felt like my feelings didn't matter. He learned to listen, to validate my pain without becoming defensive. I know, Helena, and I am so sorry for that. I was wrong. I was trying to protect everyone, and in the end, I just hurt the person I love most. Leah, too, found her voice. She spoke of the crushing weight of her shame, of her fear of judgment, of the loneliness that had been her constant companion for 2 years. I should have trusted you, Helena, she said to me in one session, her voice thick with tears. You were my best friend. I should have known you would be there for me. We were dismantling the wall of secrets brick by brick, and in its place, we were building something new, something more honest, something more resilient. The biggest change was in the relationship between Ricardo and me. The deception had created a deep wound in our marriage, but the shared process of healing was, paradoxically, bringing us closer. We started talking again, not just about logistics and schedules, but about our fears, our hopes, our disappointments. We took long walks. We went out to dinner. We rediscovered the simple, quiet intimacy we had lost along the way. One evening, as we were driving home from the center, he pulled the car over to the side of the road. He turned to me, his expression serious. I know I broke your trust, Helena, he said, and I know it will take a long time to earn it back. But I want you to know there was never another woman. There was never a moment of romantic betrayal. My heart has only ever been yours. I know that now, Ricardo, I said softly. But the lies, they were a betrayal of a different kind, he continued. A betrayal of our partnership. I made a unilateral decision to carry a burden that should have been ours to share, and that was not fair to you. I treated you like a child, not like my partner, and for that, I will be forever sorry. In that moment, I felt the last hard knot of my resentment untie. He understood. He truly, finally understood. I forgive you, Ricardo, I whispered. And as I said the words, I realized they were true. The journey was far from over. The scars would always be there, a reminder of the time we had lost, of the pain we had caused each other. But we were moving forward, together. The points on the map had led me to a place of darkness and despair, but they had also, in their own strange, circuitous way, led me back to the people I love and to a new, more honest version of the life we had built together. 6 months later, on a cool, clear Saturday morning, we all stood together in the sun-filled auditorium of the Renaissance Rehabilitation Center. It was graduation day. Tiago, along with a dozen other young men and women, had completed the residential program. He stood on the stage, his face no longer gaunt and pale, but filled with a new, quiet confidence. He was holding his guitar. He looked out at the audience, his eyes finding ours, his mother's, his uncle's, mine. He gave us a small, grateful smile. "This is a song I wrote a few weeks ago," he said, his voice clear and strong. "It's about getting lost and about the points of light that guide you home." He began to play. The song was simple, beautiful, and heartbreakingly honest. It was a song about darkness and hope, about falling and getting back up, about the love that can pull you from the deepest of wells. As he sang, I looked at the faces around me. I saw Leah, her eyes shining with tears of pride and relief. I saw Ricardo, his arm around her, a quiet pillar of support, and I knew that our strange, broken family had healed. We were not the same as we were before. We were different. We were stronger. After the ceremony, we gathered in the center's garden, the same garden where Tiago had found so much peace. He came over to us, and we all hugged him, a long, messy, tearful group hug. "I couldn't have done it without you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "All of you." He then turned to me. "Thank you, Aunt Helena," he said, "for not giving up on us." "Never, Tiago," I said, my own voice choked. "Never." Later that afternoon, Leah and I were walking through the garden alone. We stopped by a bed of vibrant, resilient-looking flowers. "I am so sorry, Helena," she said quietly, her eyes on the flowers, "for the lies, for putting you through all of that. And I am sorry for not trusting you," I replied, "for assuming the worst." We stood in silence for a moment. Then, she reached out and took my hand. Do you think we can find our way back to how we were?" "I don't think we can ever go back, Leah," I said honestly. "But I think we can go forward, to something new, something different." She squeezed my hand. "I'd like that." On the drive home, I sat in the passenger seat, my head resting against the window, watching the landscape fly by. Ricardo was driving, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on my knee. A comfortable, familiar silence filled the car. I thought about the tracker, the little black box that had started this whole painful journey. I had thrown it away months ago. I didn't need it anymore. The points on the map had led me through a dark and twisted landscape of betrayal and secrets. But they had also, in the end, led me here, to this quiet, peaceful moment, to a marriage that was stronger and more honest, to a friendship that had been broken and was now being rebuilt, to a godson who had been lost and was now found. The blue dot on the screen had once been a symbol of my deepest fears, but now, as I looked out at the setting sun, at the first faint stars beginning to appear in the twilight sky, I saw that the world was full of points of light. You just had to be willing to follow them, even when they led you into the dark. Thank you very much for watching. Share with those who also like stories, subscribe, and tell me in the comments if you liked my story. Cheers.